Hello, and welcome to Lila's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lila, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lila as she explores the captivating Italian city of Naples. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The hydrofoil from Capri cut smoothly across the Bay of Naples, and Lila stood on the deck watching the city grow larger as they approached. The October morning was clear and mild, the summer heat finally broken, and from this distance, Naples spread itself along the shore in layers, the dense waterfront buildings rising in shades of ochre and cream, the hills climbing behind them, and far to the east, the distinctive silhouette of Mount Vesuvius, hazy but unmistakable against the pale sky. She'd spent 2 days on Capri, and while the island had been beautiful, she'd felt the pull of Naples itself, that chaotic, ancient living city that she'd only glimpsed from the ferry on her way out. There was something about Naples, everyone who'd been there said so, something raw and real, and unapologetically itself, that made it unlike anywhere else in Italy. The hydrofoil slowed as it entered the port, and Lila returned to her seat, gathering her small backpack. Other passengers did the same, mostly tourists heading back to the mainland, a few locals who'd been visiting the island for the day. The boat maneuvered carefully between larger vessels, and then they were docking, the crew securing lines and opening the gate. She disembarked into Molo Beverello, the main ferry terminal, and immediately felt the difference from Capri. Where the island had been polished and pristine, Naples was gritty and immediate and alive in a way that hit all the senses at once. The smell of espresso and diesel and the sea. The sound of traffic and voices and someone shouting in Neapolitan dialect. The visual cacophony of signs and people in scooters weaving through spaces that seemed too narrow for them. Lila stood for a moment, orienting herself. Across the road the Castel Nuovo rose, that massive medieval castle with its distinctive triumphal arch, the morning sun catching its pale stone and the deep shadows of its crenellations. To her right, the long sweep of Via Partenope curved along the waterfront. And straight ahead, the dense warren of streets that led up into the city proper, into the Quartieri Spagnoli, the Spanish Quarter, where she'd decided to spend her morning. She crossed at the traffic light, which seemed more like a suggestion than a rule based on how the scooters ignored it, and began walking up via San Carlo. Within a block, the waterfront energy had transformed into something more interior, more residential. The streets here were narrow, not charming narrow like many Italian cities, but genuinely practically narrow, some barely wide enough for a small car. Buildings rose 5 or 6 stories on either side, their facades weathered and lived in, shutters hanging at various angles, laundry strung between windows, air conditioning units jutting out at intervals. The Spanish Quarter had been built in the 16th century to house Spanish soldiers, and it still retained that grid-like layout, despite centuries of organic growth and modification. Lila followed via San Carlo as it climbed gently, then turned into one of the narrow side streets, Vico Lungo Teatro Nuovo, according to the sign, and immediately felt herself entering a different world. Here, life spilled out of the buildings and into the streets. Small shrines to scent occupied niches in walls, their candles flickering even in daylight. An old woman in black sat on a chair outside her ground floor apartment, peeling potatoes into a bowl, watching the street with the calm attention of someone for whom this was both duty and entertainment. A man worked on a scooter in the middle of the narrow lane, tools spread around him, cursing softly at whatever wasn't cooperating. The buildings were painted in faded colors, dusty pink, pale yellow, sea green, though the paint was peeling in many places, revealing older layers beneath. Electrical wires crisscrossed overhead in improvised tangles that looked chaotic but presumably worked. Balconies at every level held plants in improvised containers, tomatoes in old olive oil cans, herbs in plastic water bottles, flowers in ceramic pots. Lila walked slowly, absorbing it all. This wasn't tourist Naples. This was living Naples, working Naples, the city as it had been for generations. A grocery store occupied a ground floor space, barely large enough for 3 people to stand inside, but from its small interior came a remarkable array of goods. Fresh pasta, cured meats hanging from hooks, wheels of cheese, vegetables in crates, bottles of wine stacked floor to ceiling. The proprietor, a man about 60 with a substantial belly and knowing eyes, nodded at her as she paused to look. "Buongiorno, signora." "Buongiorno," Lila replied, and that seemed sufficient. She wasn't buying, but her interest was genuine, and he seemed to appreciate that. She continued deeper into the quarter, following streets that turned and intersected at odd angles, climbing in gradual stages. The morning was getting warmer, and the shadows in these narrow lanes were welcome. At one corner she found a tiny cafe, just 4 small tables, an espresso machine, and a display case with pastries. She went in and ordered a cafe and a sfogliatella, the shell-shaped pastry Naples was famous for. The barista made the espresso with practiced efficiency, and when he placed it on the counter, in a proper ceramic cup with a small saucer, it was perfect. Dark crema on top, the aroma rich and complex. Lila drank it standing at the counter, as was the custom, and the coffee was strong enough to feel like a gentle slap awake, but smooth enough to not be harsh. The sfogliatella was still warm, its layers of thin pastry shattering at the first bite, the ricotta filling sweet and orange-scented. "Prima volta a Napoli?" the barista asked. "Si," Lila said. He nodded, satisfied, as though this explained her presence in this particular cafe at this particular time. "Benvenuta." She finished her coffee, paid the price absurdly cheap by any standard, and continued her wandering. A narrow alley opened onto a small piazza, really just a widening of the street, where children played football with a small worn ball. They moved around her without breaking their game, shouting to each other in that rapid Neapolitan dialect that barely sounded like Italian, and she stood for a moment watching them, admiring their skill and their absolute command of the small space. The buildings here bore evidence of centuries, stones worn smooth by countless hands, steps hollowed in their centers by endless footfalls, doorways that had been there since the Spanish garrison days. Lila thought about all the people who had lived here, all the ordinary lives conducted in these same spaces, generation after generation, the Spanish soldiers for whom it was built, the workers and artisans who'd made it home, the families who lived here now, hanging their laundry and cooking their meals, and raising their children in this ancient warren. A shrine to the Madonna caught her eye, more elaborate than some she'd seen, occupying a small alcove with glass doors, the interior glowing with candles and artificial flowers, photographs of the dead tucked around the edges. Fresh flowers sat in a vase and the glass was clean. Someone cared for this, maintained it, kept it as a point of devotion and community. She emerged from the Spanish Quarter onto Via Toledo, one of Naples' main shopping streets, and the contrast was immediate. Here, the street was wide and busy, lined with shops and restaurants, crowds moving in both directions. The buildings were grander, more formal, with ornate balconies and elaborate cornices. This was 19th century Naples, the city that had been modernized and made fashionable, though it sat atop and around the much older city she'd just been walking through. Lila consulted the small map she'd picked up at the ferry terminal. She wanted to see Naples from above, from the cliffs to the west, and the tourist bus that did the circuit stopped just a few blocks from here. She made her way through the crowds, noticing how different Via Toledo felt from the Spanish Quarter, how tourism and commerce created one kind of atmosphere while residential life created another entirely. She found the bus stop near Piazza del Plebiscito, that enormous square dominated by the Church of San Francesco di Paola, with its neoclassical colonnade. A red double-decker bus sat at the curb and she purchased a ticket from the driver, a day pass that would allow her to hop on and off at any stop. She climbed to the upper deck and found a seat near the front, under the open sky, as the bus began to fill with other tourists. The bus pulled away from the stop and a recorded narration began, available in multiple languages through provided headphones. Lila plugged in and selected English, and a pleasant voice began describing what they were passing. They drove through the city center, past the Teatro San Carlo, one of Europe's oldest opera houses, its facade elegant in soft pink, past more palaces and churches, each with their own history, Bourbon kings and Spanish viceroys, medieval saints and Renaissance nobles. The narration was informative without being overwhelming, offering just enough context to make the buildings meaningful, without drowning her in dates and names. The bus turned west, climbing now, heading toward Posillipo, the hill that formed the western arm of the bay. As they climbed, the streets became more residential again, but different from the Spanish Quarter. These were 19th and 20th century buildings, apartments for the middle class, with balconies looking out over the city below. Trees lined some streets, pines and palms, their shapes distinctly Mediterranean against the soft blue sky. The views began to open up. At first just glimpses between buildings, a slice of bay, a section of city, but as they climbed higher, the views became more expansive. Lila found herself turning in her seat, trying to see in all directions, not wanting to miss anything. The bus reached Parco Virgiliano, a park on the promontory, and slowed. The narration informed them this was a recommended stop, with paths through the park and viewpoints overlooking the bay. Several passengers began gathering their things, and Lila decided to join them. She descended from the bus into the parking area, and even here, before entering the park proper, the view was remarkable. The entire Bay of Naples spread before her, the city to the east, the sea in the middle, and the islands beyond. She could see Capri, where she'd spent the past 2 days, looking small and distant now. Closer, Ischia rose green and volcanic. And dominating the eastern view, Vesuvius sat in profile, its distinctive double peak immediately recognizable even at this distance. Lila entered the park, following a path that wound through Mediterranean vegetation. Umbrella pines, rosemary, wild fennel, their scents sharp in the warm air. The park was quiet, just a few other people, mostly locals by the look of them, out for morning walks or sitting on benches with books. The path led to a broad terrace with stone balustrades, designed specifically for the view, and Laila found a spot at the railing and simply looked. From this height, the city revealed its full character. The dense center packed with buildings, church domes rising at intervals, dozens of them, evidence of Naples' long Catholic history, the port with its ferries and cargo ships. The long curve of the waterfront, Via Caracciolo sweeping along the bay. And everywhere, spreading up the hills, the neighborhoods climbing in layers, the city that seemed unable to contain itself on flat ground alone. But it was Vesuvius that held her attention. The volcano sat there, silent and seemingly benign in the morning light, its slopes green with vegetation in the lower reaches, barren and brown near the summit. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful-looking mountain with what it had done, the eruption in 79 AD that had buried Pompeii and Herculaneum, the numerous eruptions since, the last as recently as 1944. The volcano was considered active, dormant but not extinct, and it was monitored constantly for signs of awakening. Laila thought about the people of Naples living in its shadow, generation after generation, building their city, raising their families, continuing their lives with this potential destruction looming over them. There was something almost defiant about it, something that spoke to a particularly Neapolitan character, the refusal to be cowed by danger, the insistence on living fully despite uncertainty. An older couple stood nearby, also looking at the view, and the man was explaining something to the woman, pointing at different sections of the city, speaking in Italian too rapid and idiomatic for Laila to follow completely. But she caught enough. He was identifying neighborhoods, recounting history, telling stories of the city he clearly loved and knew intimately. The woman listened with patient attention, asking occasional questions, and Laila found their interaction touching, this sharing of knowledge and memory. She walked along the terrace, finding different angles on the view. To the south, the coastline continued, the cliffs and beaches of the Amalfi Coast just barely visible in the distance. To the north, the Campi Flegrei, the Phlegrean Fields, a volcanic area in its own right, its ancient craters now lakes and harbors. The whole region was volcanic, shaped by the same forces that had created Vesuvius, the earth here thin and restless. A plaque on the terrace provided information about Virgil, the Roman poet, who was buried somewhere near here, hence the park's name. Laila read about Virgil's life, poems and importance to Western literature. The Aeneid had been written in the last decade he was alive, telling the story of Aeneas fleeing Troy and eventually founding what would become Rome. There was something fitting about Virgil being buried here, overlooking this bay that had been so central to the ancient world. Naples itself founded by the Greeks, later absorbed by Rome, always a place where cultures met and mixed. She found a bench in partial shade and sat, not ready to leave, wanting to absorb this view for a while longer. A cat appeared from the bushes, orange and plump, clearly well fed by park visitors or residents, and wound itself around her legs briefly before continuing on its rounds. Butterflies moved among the flowering plants, small white ones and larger orange ones, their flight patterns meandering and unhurried. The morning was advancing toward noon, and the light was changing, becoming brighter, more direct. The haze over the bay was burning off, and Vesuvius was becoming clearer, more defined. She could see now the path that wound up its slope. Tourists climbed it daily, she knew, hiking to the crater rim to peer into the heart of the volcano. Perhaps she'd do that herself another day. For now, viewing it from this distance felt right, seeing it in context, understanding how it dominated the landscape and the psychology of the place. After a while she stood and walked further into the park, following paths that wound through the vegetation. She found another viewpoint, this one looking west across the water toward the smaller islands and the open Mediterranean beyond. A cruise ship was visible on the horizon, white and enormous even at that distance, carrying its passengers to other ports, other experiences. She thought about all the people who had stood at viewpoints like this over the centuries: Greeks and Romans, medieval monks, Renaissance artists, grand tour travelers, soldiers and sailors, and merchants and pilgrims, all looking at these same views, seeing them through the lens of their own times and concerns, but all responding to the same fundamental beauty of landscape and sea and light. Eventually, she made her way back to the bus stop, where another red double-decker waited. She climbed to the upper deck again, finding a seat on the other side this time to see different perspectives as they drove. The bus filled and departed, continuing its circuit, and the narration resumed. They drove along Posillipo's coastal road, the sea immediately to one side, villas and apartment buildings on the other. The road was narrow and winding, carved into the cliffside, and the views were intermittent but spectacular when they appeared. Straight down to the water, straight out across the bay, straight toward Vesuvius. The bus descended back toward the city center, passing through neighborhoods that ranged from elegant to modest, each with its own character. The narration provided context. This palazzo built by a Bourbon king, that church containing works by Caravaggio, the street famous for coral shops, that piazza, where a famous writer once lived. Lila let it all wash over her, not trying to remember every detail, just absorbing the sense of the city's depth and complexity. Naples was like an archaeological site, where all the layers were still visible and active. Ancient Greek streets overlaid with Roman construction, medieval churches built on pagan temples, Renaissance palaces next to modernist apartment blocks. Nothing was tidied away or made coherent. It all existed simultaneously, messy and vital and real. The bus passed through Piazza del Plebiscito again, around the palace, and then along Via Partenope, the waterfront road. Here, the city's elegant side showed itself: grand hotels facing the bay, cafes with outdoor seating, well-dressed people strolling in the midday sun. The contrast with the Spanish Quarter couldn't have been more stark, yet both were authentic Naples, both were true to the city's character. They passed the Castel dell'Ovo, the egg castle, built on a small island connected to the shore, its medieval walls rising directly from the sea. The narration explained the legend behind the name. Virgil again, supposedly placing a magical egg in the castle's foundations, with the prophecy that when the egg broke, the castle would fall and Naples would suffer disaster. The egg apparently remained intact. The bus continued to the eastern end of the waterfront, near the ferry terminal where Lila had begun her day, completing its circuit. She decided to disembark here, her day of exploration feeling complete, her sense of Naples much fuller than it had been that morning. She walked to a small trattoria just off the waterfront, its entrance modest, its interior simple: tile floors, wooden tables, walls covered with photographs and football memorabilia. A waiter gestured her to a table, brought water and bread without asking, and recited the day's specials in Neapolitan accented Italian. Laila ordered pasta e fagioli, pasta and beans, one of Naples' traditional dishes, simple and satisfying. It arrived in a deep bowl, thick and hearty. The pasta and beans cooked together until they formed a creamy, substantial soup, finished with olive oil and a sprinkle of pepper. It was exactly what she wanted. Honest, flavorful, filling without being heavy. She ate slowly, watching the street outside through the open door. Scooters passed in a steady stream. A man walked by, carrying a crate of lemons balanced carefully. Two women stopped to talk, their conversation animated, full of gestures and laughter. The ordinary life of the city continuing, unchanged by tourism or observation. For dessert, the waiter brought baba, a small cake soaked in rum syrup, traditional to Naples. It was sweet and boozy, soft and rich, and she ate it in small bites, making it last, accompanied by a tiny cup of espresso that was strong enough to cut through the sweetness. When she finished and paid, again the price remarkably reasonable, she stepped back out into the afternoon sun. The day was warm now, properly warm, and she was glad for the shade of the awning outside the trattoria. She stood for a moment, deciding what to do with the rest of her afternoon, and found herself content to simply wander, to see where the streets took her, to let Naples reveal itself at its own pace. She walked back through the city, through streets she'd seen from the bus but hadn't yet walked, past churches and shops and apartment buildings, past people living their lives in this ancient, complicated, beautiful city. The history was everywhere, in the stones beneath her feet, in the buildings around her, in the volcano watching over it all. But so was the present, immediate and undeniable and fully alive. As she walked, Vesuvius remained visible at intervals, appearing between buildings, a constant presence, a reminder of both danger and beauty, of history and geology, of the way humans persist in building their lives in places that are, by any rational measure, precarious. But there was nothing rational about Naples, she thought. It operated on different principles, passion and family and tradition, and a kind of fierce local pride that transcended logic. And somehow, walking through it on this October afternoon, with the light beginning to soften and the city settling into its evening rhythms, Laila felt grateful to be here, to witness it, to carry away some small understanding of this complex, contradictory, magnificent place that had been living its particular life at the edge of the bay for 3,000 years, under the watchful gaze of its volcano, beautiful and dangerous, and utterly, unforgettably true to itself.